Well, thank you everybody for being here. My name is Chris von Baeyer. I'm with the Ariel Group. We are a leadership development and training firm based in Boston. I personally am from Toronto, so I run the Canadian operations, but I also run the global operations primarily for some of our larger clients, like Rachael Arena, who is here today, who will introduce herself in a minute. Briefly, Ariel Group provides training in what we call leadership presence, which essentially is all of the non-content-based value that is provided by a speaker or an engagement partner that has to do with body language and building trust and being able to influence, using all of those dimensions other than the analytical side. It's more the left brain training rather than the right brain training. And the last thing I'll say about Ariel Group is that we have a rather unique approach to training, which is that we use theater-based techniques and exercises to help leaders who are not actors access some of the communication skills that actors normally would be using. And that's my own background, is in the theater. So as is Rachel's, which we'll hear about in a minute. So I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Rachael Arena. I work for BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and I am the Global Learning Manager for the Center for Knowledge and Analytics. What does that mean? So the Center for Knowledge and Analytics are not the consulting staff that you might normally think of, but rather we support the case teams and the clients in a few different ways. We serve them through providing advanced analytics and data tools, so taking tons and tons of terabytes of data, distilling that down into meaningful dashboards and information that you can understand, providing takeaway software and tools that will help clients do that on their own. We also have amazing subject matter experts that provide deep expertise in particular functions or markets, healthcare, metals and mining, industrial goods, things like that. We also have a research arm where they specialize in ferreting out any possible information that you can imagine. So their specialty are data resources and sources of information. And again, as Chris mentioned, I do have a background in theater, which was what initially drew me to the Ariel Group and their techniques when we had some needs for our own leadership team.
Yes, so as you can see from the title of our presentation, Navigating Change Through Presence and Authenticity, there I think was a particular alignment between the type of value we could provide a group of learners who were really primarily analytically focused in terms of their fundamental training and the criteria that have, to this date, made them successful. What the learning gap was, and I'm curious to hear more about kind of what your need and your context was, really had to do with how do you present that data? How do you present a storyline in a dynamic way to influence various stakeholders without simply relying on the logic stream, but actually engaging the emotions and sort of the ability of people to be influenced. So how do we go about, the essential question that we're asking is these skills of communication and authenticity and presence, which we would define really in this way. We would, as a broad bucket, we would call this leadership presence. So you may have all the analytical ability in the world, but do you have the leadership presence necessary to convince somebody else to follow through with whatever your particular recommendation is, or to influence them in the way you'd like? We define leadership presence fairly simply. It's the ability to connect authentically with the hearts as well as the minds of others in order to influence them to achieve a desired outcome. So the question then becomes, at a place like BCG, can presence and authenticity actually be learned and developed? It was Mark Twain who said it takes 3 weeks of rehearsal to be truly spontaneous, which is, I think, a wonderful way to think about it. It actually takes rehearsal to be spontaneous, to be authentic, and to have presence. So are these skills teachable? Can the theater approach actually help? So this, in a sense, is what we thought would be a good case study to bring to you today, given an organizational context and a learning need that you were facing at that time 5 years ago.
Yeah, so right now, the Center for Knowledge and Analytics, my team is about almost 2,000 strong, which is a little more than 10% of all of BCG. We are fully global. We have people in every region of the world except Antarctica. And this team has been growing incredibly quickly. We're very closely aligned to our clients and to their needs. Rewind 5 years, it was 350 people, mostly in the US and Europe with a smaller Asian presence. We had 14 team managers who were dedicated to managing only, instead of 200 almost managers who are player coaches who have to lead, manage, as well as be their own experts and do their own client work. So we've had 3 names in those 5 years. So it's been a time of tremendous, tremendous change for the organization. And what we found was this led to a lot of struggles in team members, and it manifested itself in different ways. We had a little bit of attrition. We had some people who were unsure of their career path. And we found that the team managers who were able to do this really well, who were able to guide people through this, inspired this sense of connectedness in the team and groundedness. And that really came through in their presence and their authenticity. So how do we help other people develop those behaviors?
Right, and so we got together and we developed actually what ended up to be a 3-program curriculum. And many of the learners at the CKA group at BCG then will actually have at least 3 touch points with our learning program, within each of which usually there are 5 or 6 touch points because we've attached a kind of a tip and tail and coaching component to each of them. But the question I guess I would have 5 years later as we look back is, how has it worked? I mean, do you have a sense from some of your learners, your stakeholders, of what their experience going through the program has been?
Yes, definitely. I think, first of all, the feedback is excellent. We have a 92% net promoter score. We always get, almost perfect score in fulfilling objectives. So all of our metrics are really good. But I think this plays itself out best in a story. Great. So we had a guy named James, very, very senior in the organization, well-recognized expert, but very soft-spoken, very introverted. He had quite a strong accent that would make him hesitant to speak out. And I knew he'd gone through the program, but the first I really saw the results were at our regional meeting about 1.5 years ago. It's about 500 people. And James gets up and tells a beautiful story about losing a team member and how heartbroken that actually made him feel. He was devastated that this young woman didn't have a home in his team. What would make her leave? Why would this talented person not want to stay here?
Right.
So he asked. He went out to his other team members and said, is this actually a thing? Is this a problem? What do we do about this? And through demonstrating this kind of vulnerability, his team really answered him. And they said, this is the problem. And they brainstormed. They all got together at a global meeting for something else and really thought, how do we fix this? And they ended up using a combination of technologies and ways for the team to stay connected, to work together more meaningfully and more effectively. But it was just so amazing to see him step up and tell this story, step into that presence, but still be very vulnerable and really authentic. And everyone was amazed. He got pretty much a standing ovation, which you just don't get in our organization. And it really, when I asked him, he said it was the storytelling piece in our leadership presence class that really made him able to stand up and do it and made him willing to be vulnerable enough to ask those questions.
Right. So he was able to achieve what you were talking about earlier, is that sense of connection that was necessary in order to advance your organizational enterprise goals.
Exactly.
Are all of the participants, I'm curious just even on an experiential basis of how participants walk out of the sessions. I mean, how do they view it? How do they hold it in the back of their minds? When
Some really jump into it. I've had a few that, it's interesting. I have one guy who, I asked him, I said, it was Mark, hey, how did it go? And he looks at me with a big smile on his face and says, oh, I hated it. And then he said, and I'll paraphrase a little bit here, but he said, but I tried a bunch of that squishy stuff with my team, and they really seemed to like it.
Right.
So, even though he was initially quite resistant to it, what I found interesting, and I followed up with a couple of his team members since, is that he has even though the experience made him very uncomfortable, he was willing to practice some of those techniques with his team.
Right.
He saw the value in it, though he was initially very skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't like it, but he did it anyway.
Yeah.
And he was really seeing the results and the difference that it made in his team. So that's one thing I kind of found surprising.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, using a more experiential approach, requiring people to really step out of their comfort zone is really, in a sense, the only way to stretch people into new learning. I mean, learning requires some kind of uncomfortableness, and it's often a question of how willing, how much capacity an organization has to, and in a role like yourself, to introduce people to programs that will really kind of push them. And in this case, a theater-based program clearly is something that it's sort of like no pain, no gain in a sense or something. So, so I know we're coming to the end of our time, Rachel. You know, what kind of insights 5 years later have you drawn from this experience? What kind of sort of takeaways or lessons I know we have a whole bunch, but I'm curious, again, as our client, I'm curious how you frame this whole process.
I mean, I think the lessons that I've learned from this, there are a couple of them. First is that these skills can absolutely be taught. And they can be taught to an introverted, technical audience.
Right.
And I have been really amazed at this team's openness and their willingness once they get in there and they're a little scared. They're like, what's this theater stuff? How's this going to work?
Right.
But once they throw themselves into it,
Yeah.
even those for whom it is excruciatingly uncomfortable, and in
Sure,
addition to Mark,
absolutely.
there are a couple of them, they're willing to practice the skills. They're willing to go out there and do it because they really see the value in that connection. They see the
Right.
difference. They see the stories that other people tell. So I think it proves our hypothesis that connection is
Right.
what really matters. And for leaders to make that safe place in their team, these skills
Yes.
of presence and authenticity really are the path for them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us at the conference. It's been a great pleasure to present this with a close client partnership.
Yeah.
And
My pleasure. And I would also say a key to success is definitely the partnership that we
I would
have.
agree.
So, yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you very much. My
Yes.
pleasure.
thank you.